All right, welcome back. We have nearly arrived at the end of our program, but I'm really excited to welcome Carole House as our closing keynote. For those who don't know Carole, she's Director of Cybersecurity and Secure Digital Innovation for the White House National Security Council, the NSC. She spent a lot of time around this space. She joined NSC from the Treasury's FinCEN office. We just heard from Kay Turner about an hour ago on some of the work they're doing. There, she led work on cybersecurity, virtual currency, and emerging technology policy efforts as a senior cyber and emerging technology policy officer. Before FinCEN, she had a great stint at the Office of Management and Budget's Cyber and National Security Unit, as well as the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, working on cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection policy issues. Notably, Carole is a former Army captain, served in chemical defense and military intelligence till November of 2014, including a deployment to Kandahar province in Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. She has a BA in international affairs from a school, University of Georgia, who has a football team who broke my heart on New Year's Eve. But congratulations, go Dogs, woof woof. Also has an MA in Security Shield Studies from Georgetown University. Carole, really glad you could join us here today to offer some closing remarks as we wrap up this two-day event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, and go Dogs. Thank you also to the Better Identity Coalition, the FIDO Alliance, and the Identity Theft Resource Center for inviting me here today. It's incredibly hard to follow the great Liz Rosenberg, but I do appreciate the opportunity to try and join this policy forum to just very quickly offer a few perspectives from the National Security Council, many of the insights of which will just reinforce and summarize some of the great issues that have been discussed here earlier. First, I'll underscore that identity is a critical issue, and we see that the NSC sees it as one critical to national security. The rapid innovation in the internet and mobile phones has brought unprecedented convenience and efficiency to everyday Americans. When these same citizens interact with the physical world online, the experience is rampant with friction and opportunities for exploitation. The lack of strong identity amplifies this friction. So as digital payments and commerce and interactions continue to grow, there's an increasing need and opportunity for fostering development of strong identity solutions that can provide easy, secure, affordable, reliable ways to identify consumers and counterparties across digital systems. Last year, we saw the president commit, along with other G20 leaders, to welcoming the development of secure, trustworthy, interoperable digital identity solutions, and following that commitment to continue our work with international partners to explore such development. So that's going to be a critical part of focus for the National Security Council and the US government. We'll also be focused very much on the extremely complicated issues that we see surrounding identity, which includes looking at the implications for cybersecurity, economic growth, privacy. The list continues, but all of that really reinforces why dialogue at forums like this between government and industry are so valuable in helping us examine the various aspects of identity and the other complex technology and policy issues surrounding it. So first, since I do come from the NSC in the Cyber Directorate, I would like to speak briefly about President Biden's executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity and our efforts to secure critical infrastructure, and specifically calling out the role that identity plays in all of them. So all of the initiatives underneath the EO and our critical infrastructure protection efforts, as well as digital identity, all these initiatives fit under the administration's cyber strategy. The first pillar being to build back better, to modernize defenses, the second to return to the international stage with allies and partners, and the third for being better postured to compete. The EO on improving this nation's cybersecurity was the administration's down payment on the first prong of this strategy. And identity plays a critical role in support of this strategy as well, also in the EO. So first, to help us modernize our defenses in efforts like what Eric Mills spoke to earlier this morning on Zero Trust, identity can help us return to the international stage, given the significant potential applications for identity across borders and the continued work in the G20, as I mentioned earlier, and to be better postured to compete. Digital identity plays a key role to enable higher order developments for digital economies. So back to the EO and what really led to its issuance by the president. The EO reflects several lessons learned from recent major cyber incidents like SolarWinds, Microsoft Exchange hack, Colonial Pipeline. All of those major cyber incidents share some common traits that reinforce several lessons that we have taken to heart. The first, highlighting the urgent need for change. For too long, the public and private sectors have failed to take the necessary steps to modernize our cybersecurity defenses. We can't accept that we'll continue to move from one incident response to the next. Second, these recent incidents have highlighted, or not so recent anymore, highlighted the role that poor cybersecurity hygiene, including poor identity controls and poor software security, have played in making us more vulnerable to cyber attack. Security can't be an afterthought. It has to be incorporated at design. Deputy National Security Advisor Ann Neuberger has often said, I've seen in forums with industry, would you buy a car that requires you to install your own airbags? And I would encourage us to think about what does this mean for technology and service providers and how they should feel about basic protections that could help us readily and reliably know who we're dealing with, like, for example, strong authentication protections. The third lesson that was present in the issuance of the EO is that recent incidents have highlighted that everyone is a potential target. Government, large corporations, small companies, critical infrastructure, municipalities, they can all be targets of nation state and cyber criminal actors. And that also means that we all have a role in defending against this malicious activity. So at the end of the day, the cyber EO gets us closer to the end states that we're trying to drive at, preventing as many cyber attacks as possible, reducing the scope and scale of future cyber compromises, and helping us rapidly react and expel any successful intrusions. So now that I've outlined one of the key initiatives that we've driven from the National Security Council and with our partners across the Executive Office of the President and the U.S. government, I'll really underscore the role that identity plays in the EO. And it plays a critical role for good reason. Many cyber incidents that we've seen involve vectors of compromise that could have been thwarted through stronger identity and access management solutions, including implementation of multi-factor authentication solutions. We've also seen identity weaknesses as a culprit in significant amounts of cybercrime and cyber-enabled financial crime. Like synthetic identity fraud undermines identity verification. Account takeovers target weaknesses in authentication solutions. Business email compromise fraud targets weaknesses in authentication and verification between trusted counterparties that fraudulently induce a wire transfer to criminally controlled accounts. We've heard estimates from government agencies of account takeovers that amount in the hundreds of millions every single month and billions lost to fraud every year. All of these statistics point to the fact that something is not quite right in how we are authenticating and verifying identities for access to key services. And we've heard estimates also from industry that most ransomware incidents potentially could have been prevented through simple implementation of multi-factor authentication and implementing a zero trust architecture and the lessons from that. So under the EO, federal agencies are directed to adopt MFA and encryption for data at rest and in transit. When NIST published their preliminary guidance outlining security measures for critical software, that included guidance for establishing multi-factor, risk-based authentication and conditional access across the enterprise. Identity also sits at the heart of zero trust, and I know that my colleague Eric Mill spoke to that earlier this morning, which the EO directs that agencies must develop plans to advance toward, consistent with the currently draft strategy that I know is coming out soon. Zero trust is critical for us to modernize our defenses. We can no longer depend upon perimeter-based defenses to protect critical systems and data. So again, just reinforcing the messages from Eric earlier, the draft federal zero trust strategy is going to help accelerate agencies toward a shared baseline of early zero trust maturity. And it pointed to identity as its first pillar. So we're very excited to see the progress and efforts taken by agencies and the leadership shown by OMB to help set us on a clear path in achieving our objectives towards zero trust. I'll underscore again how important the strategy's provisions are, taking advantage of passwordless approaches supported under FIDO2 and WebAuthn standards, setting a clear bar of requiring phishing-resistant MFA for internal-facing government systems, which we believe is the baseline for the U.S. government. And we want to ensure that it's an option for public-facing systems. Identity protections have played a critical role in our engagement and use of our authorities to help secure critical infrastructure as well. Just last summer, DNSA Neuberger sent an open letter out to CEOs in the wake of major ransomware incidents, highlighting some of the basic cybersecurity provisions that industry could implement to better defend themselves against ransomware. And strong authentication solutions was one of the critical cyber hygiene controls that she pointed to. Identity also plays a key role in many other areas that the administration and the US government care about, whether it's countering fraud, implementing beneficial ownership requirements under the Corporate Transparency Act to help counter illicit finance and corruption, as well as our surge on resilience efforts under the US government counter ransomware strategy to improve cyber hygiene across critical infrastructure sectors and work in partnership with the cyber insurance sector. So I've highlighted a lot of those ongoing efforts. Obviously, there's a lot of great opportunity for partnership between government and with industry to support these efforts. So I would encourage all of you in industry to take advantage of forums and dialogue with the US government, with the White House. I'll call out the recently announced Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and FDIC tech sprint on identity, which I'm sure Kay spoke to earlier. I'm sorry I missed that session, which I'm sure will bear some really wonderful outcomes and great dialogue between industry and regulators. The White House is also going to continue exploring opportunities for areas where we can have the highest impact and focus on standards, services, or any messaging that can help us in refining and achieving the administration's policy objectives and identity. There's a lot for us to examine here and potentially leverage on issues like interoperability, equitable access, law enforcement implications, privacy, competition. And the administration will try to account for and consider all of these as we try to determine our approach toward digital identity. We'll continue to look at how we can leverage and shape ongoing federal efforts to support identity authentication and verification, like login.gov, attribute validation services, digital credential issuance, international and domestic standards. All of these are efforts that we're going to explore and determine if there's any particular steps that the White House should take in engaging to make sure that they support the administration's objectives on digital identity. So very excited to hear about Treasury announcing their year of action on digital identity and hopeful to continue to partner with them as they move forward. I'm sure that year promises to hold some real thought leadership and forward movement in this space. So hopefully then that's a good preview for the National Security Council's perspectives on the critical importance of identity in cybersecurity, as well as many of our other objectives on countering corruption, fraud, and building broader digital economies. We look forward to continuing to engage with all of you. And thanks again for the opportunity to speak with you all here today.
Thanks, Carole. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy and this was last minute, but I can think of nobody better to come in and give us closing remarks than you, given, I think that's the big question is it's identity authentication and the road ahead, as the event name, lays out. And so it's good to hear about how the White House is starting to think about these things. So I know your time is quite tight. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And